Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 5, Episode 32. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. I felt compelled to bring you another television program that I think is worth watching, The Penguin on HBO. And I know what you already thought. I know the thought going through your head right now, dear listener. Really? You? You watched one of these superhero comic book adaptation origin stories? I did. I gave it a short leash, and it didn't need one. Within 2 episodes, you're in. Thank you all to my loyal listeners. I do appreciate you more than you know. If you're new to the podcast, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5-star, write a review, send to friends and enemies far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. Please consider supporting.
Act 1. Watch The Penguin on HBO Max.
Hollywood in a tailspin once again. The Superman movie comes out. This Fantastic Four movie comes out. Both of these movies marketed and released at a time of the typical Hollywood blockbuster movie. These are the movies that cost $200 or $300 million to make and have to clear $1 billion to be considered successful. And neither one of them is going to do that. I don't revel in the Hollywood schadenfreude. I don't care about the fact that these studios are pumping out movies that don't make any money. We've talked about it on the podcast before. There's this superhero hangover. No one really wants to watch these superhero movies anymore. And although you could call it lazy writing and too sharp a focus on inclusion and diversity and not as much focused on story, and if you have both of those present, and I think that they are both present, when you throw in CGI to movies being our navigation on our phones now to directions. Remember when we actually had to look at maps? And I know most of you are of an age where you actually did look at a map. But if you are young enough where you never were exposed to a map, people used to be able to find things independently. They would do one of two things. They would actually have a map. They would purchase a map for an area that they weren't familiar with. And then they would look at the map, and then they would find out where they needed to go from where they were. Or they would do this amazing thing. They'd ask a stranger for directions. And many strangers, familiar with the area in which they lived, would be able to give you directions. I once prided myself on being able to do both of these things, to read a map well, and to be bold enough to ask a stranger for directions and rely upon those directions to get to a place that I was not familiar with. I am like you, dear listener. I'm overdependent on this dumbass phone and its navigation system, so much so that I find myself not even looking at the street signs anymore when I'm trying to find a place that I've never been to. I'm literally looking at my phone and barely paying attention to the world around me. The phone will both show me and tell me when I need to make the turn. That is CGI in Hollywood. There is far too little thought into storyline, plot development, character development. You can solve all those problems with CGI. Blow a couple of bridges up, have a portal from space or the ocean, emit a bunch of interplanetary CGI characters, monsters, demons, gods with a little g. And again, I don't celebrate it. But given the poor box office showing for both of these films, there's a lot of content circulating about how this could be the end of the big Hollywood blockbuster comic book movie. And if that's the case, given the cultural zeitgeist that we're living in, what's next for Hollywood? What other blockbuster type films, particularly for the summertime, are they going to come up with? They don't seem to have any stories. They don't seem to have anybody who knows how to write. They've already tried to lean on 50 years worth of old IP, older intellectual properties that were successful. Reinventing them hasn't worked. What are they going to do? In this ecosystem, a couple of critics that I respect, that I've actually been turned on to different films, different television shows, because I trust their sensibilities. I feel like they are seeking the same type of quality out of the art form that is the movie or the television show that I am. They offered in their critique of these two latest movies how different a television show was on HBO called The Penguin. The Penguin is one of the villains in the DC comic book universe, one of the villains that faces off with Batman, evidently because I didn't see the movie. In the most recent Batman film, the Penguin was reintroduced, and it was played by Colin Farrell. And Colin Farrell had to sit in a makeup chair for like 2 or 3 hours to be transformed into this character, Oswald Cobb, who is referred to as the Penguin. Well, that cameo appearance, I believe it was at the end of the movie, if what I read was correct. This cameo appearance of the Penguin at the end of the latest Batman movie gave a couple of people an idea on an origin story of the Penguin to become the head of all the crime families in Gotham. Gotham, of course, being this fictionalized version of New York. I'm not an expert on the Batman universe, but one of the interesting things about the Batman universe is that you're not dealing with a lot of supernatural characters. Batman himself doesn't have any superpowers. And then if you start to think about it, well, all of the villains in the Batman universe, they don't have any superpowers either. They are all cults of personality. They are all able either to operate via a cult of personality, or they just use the force of money or coercion to garner whatever henchmen-like support they need to effectuate the plot line in any one of the comic books. One of the interesting things about Oswald Cobb as the Penguin, from my limited understanding of the comic book, he is a staple of the criminal underworld as somewhat of a mob boss. Yet, because it's a comic book, he carries with him all of these other cartoonish styled villainies. As much as that is a costume, it's also all the gadgets that come along with it. I remember seeing advertisements for this, I believe it's only a couple of years old. So 2023 or 2024, it's not an old series, and I had no interest in it. It was just another one of these superhero origin story type things that just doesn't interest me because they'd all been done so poorly in the past. Yet, people whose sensibilities I identified with and who had recommended other properties that I found very entertaining highly recommended this. And for his part, I have been very impressed with the choices that Colin Farrell has made in his career. He had the opportunity to be one of these Hollywood pretty boys and to be part of this kind of People magazine, US Weekly magazine type paparazzi crowd. And granted, I'm sure he's played that role when it suited his purposes. But some of the choices that he's made artistically with the movies that he's been in, I've found him to be sincere and compelling as an actor in roles that I just didn't contemplate 20 years ago I thought he would ever take. So if I thought about anyone taking on this type of role and could pull it off, it would be Colin Farrell. I told myself I'd give it 3 episodes, and dear listener, I was not disappointed, and you will not be disappointed either. I highly recommend that you watch The Penguin on HBO, the origin story of this man, Oswald Cobb, becoming the Penguin. Spoiler alert, there's no Batman in it. You're not going to see the presence of Batman. This is an origin story that focuses solely on the Gotham that Oswald Cobb grew up in and how it shaped him to become the man that he eventually became, but also how his origin story within his nuclear family, his ambitions, also shaped that man. What I found so refreshing about the story was the fact that there's nothing supernatural about it, and CGI isn't bailing anyone out. This has to be a very strong and well thought out character with a strong story. So it's a strong script, a director that has a vision for it, and the supporting actors and actresses to make this world seem real. And that's exactly what you get in this television show. The Penguin does a very good job at pointing out something that I think we all believe we understand consciously, but really it operates on a subconscious level. We want there to be somewhat of a cartoonish element to our superhero and comic book movies. We don't want them to be exactly like reality because we live in reality. The dialogue, the circumstances, even the music, We want that pageantry to be ever present. And yet it's done so heavy-handed and so clumsily by so many different studios, by so many different directors and editors, that it just disgusts us. It's like cotton candy. You can take one bite and you've had as much cotton candy as you want. Every additional bite not only makes you sick, but it starts to make you nauseous. Quick tangent. If you can enjoy an entire serving of cotton candy, you disgust me. That's right, I said it. When you're standing there at the county fair, which is really the mecca of cotton candy consumption, that and maybe an amusement park, when you're standing in these questionable areas, feeling legitimately the doubts that you have about being an adult, having dignity or self-respect, and a man pulls out a paper towel roll and sticks it into a machine that looks like it was never clean, even when it was brand new, and pulls out this fiberglass appearing pink goop. If you can not only make it past one bite, but proceed on your own to consume the entirety of that paper towel roll clinging filth, you're disgusting. Back to our original programming. What the Penguin does so delicately and so masterfully is the show maintains this colorful, melodramatic, cartoonish element, but it's done so subtly, so underneath the breath, so to speak, that you recognize it's there, but you also recognize the gravity of what's going on in the television show, what's going on with these characters, the gravity of which can make you wince at times. This is not a PG-13 television show. I don't know that this type of content would ever translate to one of these Hollywood blockbuster movies, because you wouldn't be able to get your PG-13. And it was so stark to me as I was watching this television show. This isn't even like one of those Deadpool movies where you have this over-the-top violence, and sometimes even with a macabre angle, but it's not with that stark gravity of the fact that people are getting shot or people are getting stabbed, people are losing their lives. In The Penguin, you fully recognize the gravity of what's going on. It's not lost on you because it's not lost on the director or the editor. It's part of the story, and the characters reflect as much. So you as the viewer become just as aware of the precarity of the environment that all of these characters operate in because of what you see going on around you. And that wouldn't be possible without the strength of the acting from practically every one of the actors and actresses in this show. This is one of those television programs that once you get halfway through it, you realize that everyone who is handed a script, no matter what their involvement in this television show, starts to realize this is something special. This is something different. Longtime listeners of the podcast will recognize I often find myself enjoying a television program to the extent I can say I'm lost in the content. In other words, the circumstances of the show aren't so stupid that I wake up, so to speak, in the middle of the show and be like, that was dumb. That was unrealistic. This is clumsy. I'm able to calmly suspend my disbelief for the entirety of an episode. And yes, there's always going to be something in these television shows that's going to strike one person or the other as unrealistic or stupid. But I challenge you to watch this show, dear listener, The Penguin, and tell me that you weren't able to watch an hour go by so quickly and have that debate that you haven't had in a long time over a television program. The next episode's an hour. It's 10:21. Do we want to stay up? Do I want to stay up until 11:30 watching this next episode? I do, but I've got to get up in the morning, and I don't. Hell, maybe that should be the standard by which I'm looking at all of these television programs. Do I actually want to watch the next episode, regardless of the circumstances of how late it is at night? Am I compelled to do so? That's how good the program is. The Penguin fit into that category. And this show may be a canary in the coal mine for the rest of Hollywood, that they need to get away from all of the comic book, the cartoonish elements of these superhero movies, of these comic book movies, and go back to the story. You can layer in all of those things as the story is served by them, but to rely on it as a device to move the story along because you don't have any better ideas, to lean so heavily on the CGI, you don't need it. The Penguin is perfect evidence of that. You watch an ordinary man, ordinary in the sense that all he has is ambition because he grows up in a very poor part of what is, again, Gotham, this fictionalized version of New York City, and you watch as he ascends through the ranks of this crime family, navigating around a number of other characters that are fully fleshed out, that you start to become familiar with, if not get to know over the course of the series, guessing. And that's the best word for it. You're guessing how the writer and the director are going to weave these things together with all of this betrayal and all of this ambition, and yet, at times, all of this humanity, all of this compassion. How does it all play out over the course of this story? And then how does that outcome lend itself to the possibility of this person, Oswald Cobb, and these people, all of these other characters that are in his orbit, becoming a part of the more global Batman narrative? In anticipation of recording this podcast, I did do a little research, and the guy who wrote that series and directed it, his name is Matt Reeves. He's now thinking about how he can weave the narrative that he created in that television show into the next Batman movie, or potentially another property, maybe another television series, not so much focused on the Penguin, but maybe the universe that is Gotham post the last Batman movie. When I read that, after having seen what Reeves did over the course of a season, which is 8 one-hour episodes, I'm excited for the possibility of a new Batman property, and I'm also excited that there's a possibility that it will be rated R, that this guy, Reeves, will be able to marry this balance between reality and a very well-written, well-acted, hard-hitting, gritty crime drama with that cartoonish melodrama that we've come to expect out of a superhero movie. There might be hope yet for the Hollywood summer blockbuster. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.